Mr. Daniels locked the classroom door after the last child had left, or at least he thought they had. A soft sniffle came from the corner near the reading mats. When he turned, he saw little Jordan sitting on the floor, his tiny backpack on his lap, his round eyes heavy with sleep. The clock on the wall showed it was already past 8 in the evening. He crouched down and asked gently, "Jordan, where's your mommy?" The boy shrugged, his lower lip trembling. "She's at work," he whispered. Mr. Daniels knew Jordan's mother worked long hours at 2 jobs to keep food on the table. He also knew she often ran late because she cleaned offices in the city, and sometimes buses didn't run on time. Tonight, though, something felt different. He tried calling her, but the call went straight to voicemail. The winter wind howled outside, rattling the classroom windows. Sending Jordan to wait alone at the small town's after-hours shelter wasn't an option. Mr. Daniels pictured the cold, crowded rooms and the unfamiliar faces. Jordan deserved warmth, comfort, and someone he knew. He took a deep breath and decided, "You can stay here tonight, buddy. We'll make it nice and cozy." Jordan's eyes widened. "Like a sleepover?" Mr. Daniels smiled. "Exactly like a sleepover." He grabbed the spare blankets from the cupboard, the ones they used for nap time, and spread them on the soft carpet in the reading corner. Jordan helped, his little hands dragging the blanket across the floor. They pushed 2 beanbags together for pillows. Mr. Daniels dimmed the classroom lights, leaving only the small lamp on the bookshelf glowing. The boy's small stomach growled, and Mr. Daniels chuckled. "Hold on, I think I have something." From his desk drawer, he pulled out a granola bar and a banana he'd saved from lunch. Jordan munched happily while Mr. Daniels filled a plastic cup with warm water from the dispenser. He knew the boy's mother didn't like him drinking too much juice before bed. When Jordan finished, Mr. Daniels helped him change into the spare set of pajamas the school kept for emergencies. They were a little big, but Jordan didn't mind. He crawled onto the blanket nest, hugging his backpack as if it were a teddy bear. Mr. Daniels lay down beside him, propped on one elbow. "Want me to read you a story?" Jordan nodded quickly, so he reached for "Goodnight Moon" from the shelf. His voice was soft and steady, and Jordan's eyes began to close before the story ended. The wind outside grew louder, rattling the door. Mr. Daniels slid closer, draping part of the blanket over himself and the child. Jordan shifted in his sleep, pressing against his chest. The warmth of the small body in his arms made him tighten the blanket around them both. Hours passed, and the hum of the building's heater filled the silence. Mr. Daniels didn't sleep much, and every time Jordan stirred or mumbled, he would gently pat his back, murmuring, "It's okay, I'm here." In those quiet moments, he thought about how unfair it was for children to have to face nights like this, cold, uncertain, and without their parents. He remembered his own childhood, how his mother had worked double shifts at a factory. There were nights when he waited alone, wondering if she would make it home before he fell asleep. Maybe that was why he couldn't imagine leaving Jordan in a shelter or handing him to strangers. Near midnight, Jordan woke up crying softly. "I want Mommy," he whispered, his voice shaky. Mr. Daniels rubbed his small shoulders. "I know, buddy. She'll be here tomorrow. I promise. Until then, I'm right here." The boy sniffled, then clung to his shirt until his breathing slowed again. Sometime around 2 in the morning, the building creaked in the wind. Mr. Straight, Daniels shifted so that Jordan's head rested fully on his arm. His shoulder ached, but he didn't move. The little boy's trust was fragile, and breaking it was unthinkable. By 4, the classroom was cold despite the heater. Mr. Daniels got up quietly, tucked the blanket snugly around Jordan, and went to the supply cupboard. He found another blanket and an old teacher's sweater, which he draped over the sleeping child before lying back down. He studied Jordan's face in the dim light, the tiny eyelashes, the smudge of chocolate near his mouth from the granola bar, the faint whistle in his breathing. He wondered how a world so big could make children so vulnerable, and why so few people seemed to notice. Morning came slowly with a faint gray light filtering through the blinds. Jordan stirred first, blinking up at him. "You stayed," the boy said in a small, surprised voice. Mr. Daniels smiled. "Of course. You think I'd leave you here alone?" Jordan's face softened into a sleepy grin before he curled closer, as if delaying the moment he had to get up. Mr. Daniels let him rest a little longer. The day would come soon enough, with breakfast, other children, and the noisy rhythm of school. But for now, it was just the two of them, lying on a classroom floor that had, for one night, been safer and warmer than the world outside. The decision to stay had cost him a night's sleep, but as he looked at Jordan's peaceful face, he knew it was worth every minute. The soft hum of the heater still filled the empty kindergarten classroom when the janitor arrived early in the morning. He paused at the doorway, surprised to see Mr. Daniels lying on the carpet, one arm tucked under his head, the other wrapped around the small sleeping boy. The janitor smiled quietly and went about his work, careful not to wake them. As the janitor mopped the hallway, he noticed the faint red glow from the corner of the ceiling, the tiny security camera blinking. The school had installed cameras in every classroom after a break-in years ago. The night's recording was still being stored in the system. Later that morning, when the security officer reviewed the footage during his routine check, he stopped halfway through the file. On the screen, the timestamp showed 11:47 p.m. Mr. Daniels was lying on the floor, adjusting the blanket over the small boy, tucking it in with care. A little later, the camera captured him sitting up and gently rubbing the boy's back when he stirred in his sleep. The sight was unusual, not because it looked wrong, but because it looked so rare. A teacher staying through the night just to make sure a child felt safe. The officer leaned back in his chair, watching the moment again. His job didn't usually involve emotions, but something about the scene stayed with him. This wasn't a man doing his duty for a paycheck. This was someone going far beyond what anyone expected. He downloaded the short clip onto a secure drive, intending to show it to the principal. When she saw it, her face softened. "He didn't tell anyone?" she asked. The officer shook his head. Not a word. He just did it. The principal knew Mr. Daniels well, dedicated, humble, and always putting the children first. But even she was surprised. She thought about keeping it private, but the act was too genuine to go unnoticed. She sent the clip to a school board member, Miss Harper, with a short message. "You need to see this." Miss Harper was at home when she opened the file. The video played, and she leaned closer to her laptop, her hand covering her mouth. She knew the boy's mother, had seen her at parent meetings with tired eyes and calloused hands. She knew the family had little, and seeing Mr. Daniels give so much without asking for anything broke something open inside her. She replayed the footage 3 times before picking up her phone. There was someone she wanted to show it to, an old friend she had worked with on charity projects before. He was a man known for helping children in difficult situations, a man whose wealth and influence had built community centers and scholarship programs across the city. His name was Richard Lawson. Richard was not easy to reach without an appointment, but Miss Harper had his personal number. She sent him the clip with only a short text. "Tell me this doesn't deserve your attention." It was late evening when Richard finally sat down in his study to go through his messages. He almost skipped over the one from Miss Harper, but curiosity made him press play. The video was grainy in the dim light, but the story it told was clear. A man in a teacher's sweater, lying on a classroom floor, keeping a small child warm with nothing but blankets and patience. Richard leaned forward, watching the way Mr. Daniels checked the boy's breathing before adjusting the blanket again. He saw how the teacher didn't seem to sleep much, staying alert in case the child woke frightened. The billionaire felt an unexpected tightness in his chest. He thought of his own childhood, the years before his father's business had taken off. He remembered one winter night when he'd fallen asleep in a cold apartment. No heating, only to wake and find his mother had given him her own blanket. That kind of quiet sacrifice stayed with you for life. Richard watched the video twice more. By the end, his mind was made up. He didn't know this teacher, but he wanted to meet him. Not with cameras or press, not with an announcement. He wanted to look him in the eye and see if the man in the video was the same man in real life. The next morning, Richard called Miss Harper. "I need the name of that teacher." "Bushra's," he said simply. She gave it without hesitation, adding, "He's not the kind to seek praise. If you go, don't expect him to brag." That made Richard even more curious. He had met plenty of people who boasted about doing far less. This man had done something extraordinary and kept it to himself. By the time the sun rose over the city, Richard Lawson's black town car was already heading toward the small elementary school on the east side. The driver glanced in the rearview mirror and far, wondering why his boss was visiting such a modest part of town. Richard didn't explain. Inside the school, the day had begun like any other. Children's laughter echoed down the hallways, and the smell of crayons and glue lingered in the air. In room 2B, Mr. Daniels knelt beside a table where Jordan and two other children were painting paper animals. He wore the same warm smile he always did, as if the long, sleepless night had never happened. But in a quiet office down the hall, a powerful man was arriving, and the teacher, still focused on helping a child paint inside the lines, had no idea his life was about to change. Richard Lawson stepped out of the black town car, the morning sunlight catching on his tailored suit. He looked around at the modest school building. Brick walls, faded blue doors, and a small playground with a worn slide. It was far from the grand campuses he had funded in the past. He took a slow breath, adjusted his coat, and walked toward the entrance. The receptionist looked up from her desk, startled to see him. "Good morning. Can I help you?" she asked, her voice hesitant. She recognized his face. Everyone in the city knew him from the news. Richard leaned forward slightly and spoke in a calm tone. "I'm here to see Mr. Daniels. I believe he teaches kindergarten." The receptionist blinked, unsure how to respond. Is he expecting you?" Richard smiled faintly. "No, I prefer surprises." After a moment, she nodded and called down the hallway for the principal. The principal appeared, smoothing down her sweater as she approached. She looked from Richard to the receptionist, then back to him. "Mr. Lawson, this is unexpected," he simply said. "I'd like to meet the man from the video." The principal's eyes softened, and she nodded slowly. "He's in room 2B. Richard followed her down the hall. The walls were covered in colorful drawings, handprints in paint, and photos of smiling children. The closer they got, the louder the laughter became. Through the open door, Richard saw him, a tall man in a simple sweater and slacks, kneeling beside a low table. 3 children were painting animal masks, and he was patiently helping a little girl fix the ears on her paper cat. His sleeves were rolled up, his hands stained with bright blue paint, but his face was relaxed, focused entirely on the children in front of him. The principal stepped inside first. "Mr. Daniels, you have a visitor." He glanced up, brushing his hands on a towel. When his eyes met Richard's, there was no sign of recognition, no nervousness, just polite curiosity. "Hello," Mr. Daniels said, standing to shake his hand. "I'm Mr. Daniels, and you are?" "Richard Lawson," the billionaire replied. "I've heard something about you." Mr. Daniels frowned slightly. "I'm afraid I don't know what you mean." Richard studied him for a moment. "I saw what you did for that boy, staying with him all night, making sure he felt safe. Most people wouldn't have gone that far." The teacher glanced at the children, making sure they were busy, then lowered his voice. "It was just the right thing to do. Anyone would have done it." Richard tilted his head. "Would they? I'm not so sure." Mr. Daniels shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I'm not really looking for attention. The boy's mother works hard. She couldn't get here in time. He needed someone, and I was here. That's all." Richard noticed there was no pride in his voice, only sincerity. He didn't speak like a man defending himself, but like one who didn't see his actions as anything special. That humility struck Richard more than the video itself. A child tugged at Mr. Daniels' sleeve. Can you help me with the glue?" The teacher smiled, excused himself, and crouched to help the boy without another word. Richard watched the way he listened patiently, how he didn't rush, how he made the child feel like the most important person in the room at that moment. When Mr. Daniels returned, Richard asked, "Do you have a few minutes to talk privately?" The teacher hesitated, glancing at the children again. "Only if someone watches the class." The principal nodded, stepping inside to take over. They walked to a quiet bench in the school's small courtyard. Richard leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You didn't tell anyone about that night?" Mr. Daniels shook his head. "No reason to. It's not about me. It's about the kid." Richard studied him. "Do you realize how rare that is? I've met people who would make sure the whole city knew if they did something half as kind." Mr. Daniels smiled faintly, almost amused. "Children don't need heroes who are famous. They need people who are there when it matters. That's it." For a moment, Richard was quiet, taking in the words. This was the exact kind of person he wanted running his projects. someone who cared more about the children than about his own name. He asked about the boy, Jordan, and Mr. Daniels told him how he'd stayed calm through the night, how he'd cried for his mother, but eventually fell asleep knowing someone was there. He didn't dramatize the story or make himself sound noble. He told it as if it were just part of the job. Richard felt something settle in his chest. He had seen enough. The man in the video was exactly the man sitting in front of him now, steady, selfless, and unshaken by the idea of recognition. When they stood, Richard offered his hand again. "I'll be in touch," he said. Mr. Daniels simply nodded, then returned to his classroom without asking why a billionaire had come to see him in the first place. Richard watched him go, a small smile tugging at his lips. This wasn't a man who needed convincing to care, and that was exactly why Richard already knew he was going to change his life. The video didn't stay quiet for long. Miss Harper had only shared it with Richard, but somehow one of her assistants, moved by what they saw, showed it to a friend. That friend worked for a local community page on social media. By the next morning, the short clip was uploaded with a caption, "This is what real care looks like." The grainy security footage showed Mr. Daniels lying on the classroom floor, one arm around the little boy, adjusting the blanket as the child shifted in his sleep. The boy's face was hidden for privacy, but the warmth of the moment spoke for itself. Within hours, the video spread beyond the local page. Parents began sharing it with messages about their own children's teachers. Strangers commented that this was the kind of person who deserved recognition. By evening, it had reached larger accounts with millions of followers. Words like selfless, hero, and guardian flooded the comment sections. Reporters started calling the school, wanting to interview Mr. Daniels. The principal tried to shield him, telling them he wasn't interested in publicity. Still, they showed up outside the school gates, waiting for a chance to talk to him. One morning, as he arrived carrying a bag of art supplies, a woman with a camera stepped into his path. "Mr. Daniels, can we get a statement about the night you stayed with the child?" He froze for a moment, then shook his head. "I'm just here to teach. Please let me get to my class." Inside the classroom, he tried to ignore the buzz. Children painted, read books, and built towers out of blocks as if nothing had changed. But every so often, a colleague would peek in with a curious look, as if wanting to hear his side of the story. He never gave it. That afternoon, during recess, he sat on a bench watching the children play. Two parents approached him. One was Jordan's mother, her eyes wet with gratitude. She whispered, I didn't realize you stayed with him all night." Mr. Daniels gave her a reassuring smile. "You were working. He was safe. That's all that matters." The other parent simply said, "We need more people like you." He thanked her, but quickly changed the subject, asking how her daughter was doing with reading. It was easier to talk about the kids than about himself. Meanwhile, the video's reach kept growing. News anchors mentioned it briefly between headlines, calling it a reminder of kindness in a world full of bad news. On social media, artists sketched drawings of the moment, adding soft colors to the grainy scene. Someone even started a petition to give him an award for his dedication. At first, the attention made Mr. Daniels uncomfortable. He had never wanted to be noticed. But as he walked home one evening, a stranger stopped him on the sidewalk. "You don't know me," she said, "but I saw the video. I work nights too. I wish my son had a teacher like you." She smiled before walking away, leaving him standing there in the cold with her words echoing in his mind. The next day, a letter arrived at the school addressed to him. Inside was a short note from an elderly man who had been a teacher 50 years ago. It read, "The world will forget test scores and lesson plans. It will remember moments like yours." Despite all the noise outside, Mr. Daniels kept his routine. He arrived early to prepare lessons, helped tie shoelaces, and reminded children to share crayons. When asked by a fellow teacher why he wouldn't just give one interview to set the record straight, he said, "There's nothing to set straight. I stayed with a child who needed me. That's all there is to it." But deep down, he noticed something changing. Parents greeted him with warmer smiles. Colleagues looked at him with new respect. Even the children seemed to sense something, climbing into his lap during story time more often, holding his hand on the way to lunch. One Friday afternoon, as the week ended, he found a small card on his desk. It had been made with construction paper, glitter, and crayons. In uneven handwriting, it said, "Thank you for taking care of us." There was no name, but he didn't need one. While Mr. Daniels quietly continued his work, Richard Lawson was watching everything unfold from a distance. The billionaire saw the videos rise, the public reaction, and the way the teacher handled it all without letting it change his focus. It confirmed what Richard had thought when they met. This was not a man looking for fame, but a man driven by purpose. And Richard knew the time was coming to make his offer. But before he could, the world had already put a spotlight on Mr. Daniels, whether he wanted it or not. Richard waited until the excitement from the video had calmed a little. He didn't want his visit to feel like part of the public attention. When he called the principal again, she arranged for them to meet at a small family-owned restaurant near the school. It was a quiet place, the kind where the smell of warm bread and soup lingered in the air. Mr. Daniels arrived on time, wearing his usual sweater and neatly pressed shirt. He looked a little unsure of why a billionaire had invited him to dinner. Richard stood to greet him and shook his hand warmly. "Thank you for coming," Richard said. They sat at a corner table away from other customers. A waitress brought water and menus, but Richard barely looked at his. "I wanted to talk to you about something important," he began. "I've built community centers, funded scholarships, and supported schools, but I've been searching for the right person to lead something new." Mr. Daniels listened quietly, his eyes focused but cautious. "And you think that person is me?" Richard leaned forward. "I saw the video, but more than that, I met you. You stayed with a child all night, not for recognition or reward, but because it was the right thing to do. That's exactly the kind of person I need." Mr. Daniels shifted in his seat. "I'm just a teacher. I'm not sure I'm the kind of leader you're looking for." "You're exactly the kind," Richard replied without hesitation. "What I'm planning is a fully funded early childhood education center, a place that doesn't just teach, but makes sure no child is ever left without care, even after hours. Somewhere warm and safe where kids can stay if their parents are working late or facing emergencies. You would run it." Mr. Daniels took a slow sip of water, thinking, "That sounds bigger than anything I've done before." Richard smiled. "It's big because it matters, and I believe you could do it better than anyone else." The waitress brought their food, a bowl of hearty soup for Richard, a plate of roasted chicken and vegetables for Mr. Daniels. For a moment, they ate in silence. Then Mr. Daniels asked, "Would this mean leaving my class?" Richard hesitated. "It would mean overseeing the center full-time. There would be children of all ages, but you'd need to manage staff, programs, and the facility. You wouldn't be teaching the same way you do now." Mr. Daniels set his fork down. "I love my class. Those kids, they're why I get up in the morning." His voice softened. "I'm afraid if I leave the classroom, I'll lose what I love most." Richard nodded slowly. "I understand, but think of it this way. Right now, you can help 20 children a year. At the center, you could help hundreds. You'd be shaping something that could last for generations." The words made Mr. Daniels pause. He pictured children laughing and playing in a building that felt like home. Home, parents at ease knowing their kids were safe. Still, there was a tightness in his chest at the thought of giving up his small classroom. "I would consider it," he said finally, "but only if the center could be near the school. I want to still spend time in the classroom, maybe in the mornings, and be with the kids in a real way, not just behind a desk." Richard's smile returned, wider this time. "Then that's what we'll do. We'll build it right next door." The deal was not about contracts or signatures that night. It was about understanding. Richard didn't just want to fund a project. He wanted to trust the person running it. And Mr. Daniels didn't just want a job. He wanted to keep the heart of why he became a teacher. As they left the restaurant, the winter air was cold, their breath turning into mist. Richard extended his hand again. "I'll have my team contact you. We can start planning next week." Mr. Daniels shook it firmly. "If we do this, it's for the kids. That's the only reason I'll say yes." Richard nodded. "That's the only reason I asked." They parted ways under the soft glow of the streetlights. Neither of them said it out loud, but both knew that something big had just begun. Something that started with one cold night on a classroom floor and a man who refused to let a child face it alone. The days after the dinner were filled with phone calls, sketches, and meetings. Richard's team sent architects to look at the empty lot beside the school. They took measurements, drew up blueprints, and presented designs for a modern, bright building with wide windows, colorful play areas, and rooms for learning and rest. Mr. Daniels sat through each meeting, listening carefully. The plans were beautiful, but something kept tugging at him. One afternoon, while the architect explained the outdoor playground design, he raised his hand. "It's all wonderful," he said, "but I don't see a quiet space here. There needs to be a place where a child can curl up if they're scared or tired. Not every kid wants noise and lights all the time." The room went quiet for a moment, then Richard nodded. "Add it," he told the architect. "Make it as important as the playground." Another meeting focused on schedules and staffing. The project manager suggested that the center close at 7 p.m. to save on costs. Mr. Daniels leaned forward. "That's exactly the problem we're trying to fix. Parents who work night shifts don't get home by 7. Some don't get home by midnight. If we close early, we're leaving the same children we promised to help without a safe place to go." Richard smiled at how firmly he spoke. "He's right," Richard said to his team. "It stays open all night if it needs to." Still, Mr. Daniels felt a weight in his heart. He spent his mornings in the kindergarten classroom as always, reading to his students, tying shoes, and helping with art projects. But every afternoon was now filled with construction plans and budget discussions. He worried that when the center opened, these mornings with his class would be gone. One evening, after everyone else had left the school, he stayed behind to clean the paintbrushes from an art project. Jordan, the little boy from that cold night, had painted a bright yellow sun with a smile in the middle. Mr. Daniels found himself staring at it for a long time. He realized that whatever fears he had about change, this project would mean children like Jordan would always have somewhere safe, even when life was hard. The next morning, he told Richard his decision. "I'll do it, but I need one promise. I still spend part of my time in the classroom, not just visiting, but actually teaching." Richard agreed instantly. "Done. We'll hire an assistant director for the center so you can split your time. The kids will get the best of both worlds, your leadership and your teaching." Construction began quickly. Mr. Daniels visited the site almost every day. He wore a hard hat, walked through the framing of the building, and imagined the walls filled with children's laughter. He suggested adding shelves low enough for toddlers to reach, sinks that small hands could use without help, and cozy corners with soft rugs. Some nights, when the crew had left, he stood alone in the half-finished building. The smell of sawdust and fresh paint filled the air. He could already picture parents dropping their kids off with relief in their eyes, knowing this place was safe. Despite the excitement, there were moments of doubt. One afternoon, while teaching his class, a little girl asked, "Mr. D, will you still be my teacher when the new place opens?" The question hit him hard. He knelt beside her. "Yes," he said softly. "I'll still be here. I just might have more kids to look after." She smiled, satisfied with the answer, and ran back to play. The first part of the building to be finished was the reading room, a warm, quiet space with beanbags, blankets, and a low bookshelf. Mr. Daniels stood in the doorway the day it was completed, remembering the blanket nest he had made for Jordan months earlier. This room, he thought, would be like that night, but for every child who needed it. As the walls went up and the paint dried, Richard visited more often. He didn't just check progress. He asked for Mr. Daniels' thoughts on everything. "This is your vision now," Richard told him one afternoon. "I'm just making sure you have the tools to build it." It wasn't until the bright sign with the center's name was installed that Mr. Daniels felt the weight of what they were creating. It wasn't just a building. It was a promise that no child would have to sleep alone in a cold, unfamiliar place again if there was a way to keep them safe. The night before the grand opening, Mr. Daniels walked through the finished center in the quiet. The lights were soft, the rooms clean and ready, tiny chairs weighted by colorful tables. The shelves were full of books and toys, and in the corner of the reading room, a small blanket and pillow lay folded, waiting for the first child who might need them. He stood there for a long time, knowing the real work was about to begin. This wasn't just a job. It was the biggest test of his heart, and he was ready. The morning of the grand opening began with a bright sky and a soft breeze. Colorful balloons lined the walkway to the new building, swaying gently as parents, children, and community members gathered outside. The smell of fresh paint mixed with the scent of coffee from a nearby table where volunteers poured drinks for guests. Mr. Daniels stood near the entrance, wearing a clean shirt and the same warm smile he gave his students every morning. He greeted each family as they arrived, shaking hands, bending down to talk to children at their level, and introducing them to the staff members who would be working at the center. Richard arrived in a simple jacket, avoiding the kind of attention his presence usually brought. Instead of standing in the spotlight, he stayed to the side, watching as Mr. Daniels moved from one person to another, making everyone feel welcome. He's the real star today, Richard thought. Inside, the center gleamed. Sunlight poured through large windows, lighting up the play areas and reading nooks. The classrooms were stocked with art supplies, blocks, books, and learning games. There was a nap room with soft beds and blankets, a kitchen for warm meals, and an outdoor playground with swings and slides. Parents toured the rooms with their children, who ran excitedly from one space to another. A little boy stopped at the reading corner, pulled a book from the shelf, and curled up in a beanbag. His mother smiled, whispering to Mr. Daniels, "He's never this calm anywhere else." The opening ceremony began with the principal giving a short speech about how the center came to be. She spoke about the night Mr. Daniels stayed with Jordan and how that small act had inspired something much bigger. The crowd turned to look at him, clapping warmly, but he shook his head modestly and pointed toward the building. "It's about them," he said softly, nodding at the children. Richard stepped forward next, his voice carried across the crowd without being too loud. He talked about building a place that would always have an open door for children no matter the time of day or night. Then he turned to Mr. Daniels. "This man," Richard said, "showed me what it truly means to put children first. Without him, none of this would exist." The applause grew louder, but Mr. Daniels didn't let it pull him away from his purpose. When the ribbon was cut, he was the first to step inside with the children, showing them where they could play, learn, and rest. Throughout the day, families signed up for programs. Some parents spoke quietly with Mr. Daniels about their schedules, worried about leaving their children at night. He reassured them, explaining that the center was built for exactly those situations. "We'll keep them safe," he promised, "and we'll keep them happy." In the afternoon, Jordan arrived with his mother. She looked around the building in awe, running her fingers along the smooth walls. "You did this because of that night?" she asked. Mr. Daniels smiled. "Because of you and him," he said, nodding toward the boy. "You trusted me with your child. Now I'm making sure other parents have that same trust." Jordan ran straight to the nap room and pointed at one of the small beds. "This one's mine," he said proudly, even though there were no assigned spots. Mr. Daniels laughed and let him have the moment. As the sun began to set, the crowd thinned. Some children stayed for the center's first official evening session. The staff prepared dinner, the smell of pasta and garlic bread filling the air. Mr. Daniels sat at a small table, eating with a group of children who were already starting to feel at home. Later, a single mother came rushing through the doors, breathless from her late shift. "I'm sorry," she said. "I couldn't get here sooner." Her daughter was in the reading corner, fast asleep under a blanket. Mr. Daniels smiled. "She's fine. Take your time. We're here for you." The mother's eyes filled with tears as she picked up her child. "You don't know what this means," she whispered. Mr. Daniels just nodded. He did know. As night fell, the lights inside the center glowed warmly against the dark. Richard came by quietly to check on things. He found Mr. Daniels in the nap room, tucking a blanket around a boy whose father was working late. It reminded Richard of the very moment that had started it all, the grainy video of a man keeping watch over a sleeping child. Only now it wasn't one child. It was many. When Richard stepped back outside, he glanced at the bright sign above the entrance, Jordan Care Center. He felt a deep satisfaction knowing the name wasn't just for show. It represented safety, trust, and kindness. Inside, Mr. Daniels walked through the quiet rooms, checking on each child. This was more than a grand opening to him. It was the first night of many where no child in this place would have to feel alone. A cold evening settled over the town, and the warm yellow lights of the Jordan Care Center glowed like a beacon in the dark. Inside, the sound of quiet laughter and the faint hum of a lullaby played from a small speaker in the nap room. Mr. Daniels walked slowly through the building, checking each room as he always did before the night staff took over. In the art room, a few older children were finishing their drawings while waiting for their parents. One of them proudly held up a picture of a house with a heart above it. "This is the center," she said. "It's my favorite place." Mr. Daniels smiled and told her to hang it on the display wall for everyone to see. In the play area, two toddlers were building a tower of blocks while a staff member watched nearby. Mr. Daniels crouched down, adding a block to the top, making them giggle when the tower swayed. He left them laughing and continued his walk. In the reading corner, he found a little boy curled up on a beanbag, holding a book upside down. Mr. Daniels gently turned it the right way and sat beside him, reading a few pages until the boy's mother arrived. She thanked him quietly, her eyes showing the relief of a long day ending with her child safe and content. As the evening grew later, the number of children slowly decreased. Some parents came from late shifts, others from second jobs. Each time, Mr. Daniels greeted them by name, giving a short update on their child's day. He noticed the way their shoulders relaxed when they walked through the door, the way they lingered for just a moment in the warmth before stepping back into the cold. Around 9, a father arrived to pick up his son. His work uniform was stained with oil, his hands rough and tired. He explained that traffic had kept him longer than expected. Mr. Daniels waved it off. "He's been fine. We made a paper airplane together," he said, and handed the boy over. The father hesitated, then said softly, "I never have to worry when he's here. Thank you." Later, as the building grew quiet, only one child remained, a little girl whose mother worked the night shift at a hospital. She was asleep in the nap room, a small blanket pulled over her. Mr. Daniels sat in the chair beside her bed, reading from a worn notebook while keeping an eye on her. The front door opened quietly, and Richard Lawson stepped inside. He had stopped by without calling ahead, wanting to see the center during its calmest hours. A staff member pointed him toward the nap room, where he found Mr. Daniels watching over the sleeping girl. Richard paused in the doorway, the image pulling at him in a way he hadn't expected. It was the same posture, the same watchful care from the video that had first brought him here. Only now, the scene wasn't grainy security footage. It was real, right in front of him. "Mr. Daniels looked up and smiled in greeting. "Couldn't stay away?" he asked quietly. Richard stepped closer, keeping his voice low. "I wanted to see it for myself, and I see exactly what I hoped for." They spoke softly so as not to wake the girl. Richard told him how proud he was of what the center had become. Mr. Daniels simply said, "It's not about pride. It's about making sure no child feels forgotten." When the girl's mother arrived just after midnight, she whispered her thanks and left with her daughter, still half asleep on her shoulder. Mr. Daniels walked them to the door, locking it behind them. The building was now empty of children, but it didn't feel empty. It felt like it was holding something unseen but alive, something that came from the care given within its walls. Richard and Mr. Daniels stood in the main hallway. The billionaire looked around at the bright, clean rooms, the shelves neatly stocked, the drawings taped to the walls. "You know," Richard said, "most people would have turned that night on the classroom floor into a story about themselves. You turned it into a home for hundreds of children." Mr. Daniels gave a small shrug. "It was never about me. It was about doing what I could with what I had. Now I just have more to give." Richard extended his hand, and they shook firmly. "You've built something that will outlast both of us," Richard said. After Richard left, Mr. Daniels walked through the center one last time, turning off the lights room by room. When he reached the reading corner, he paused, looking at the small blanket folded neatly on the beanbag. He picked it up, running his fingers over the fabric. It reminded him of the first blanket he had wrapped around Jordan all those months ago. He draped it over the back of the chair, ready for the next child who might need it. Then he stepped outside into the cold night, locking the door behind him. The sign above the entrance glowed softly in the darkness, Jordan Care Center. As he walked to his car, he knew there would be more long nights ahead, some with laughter, some with tears. But he also knew that no matter how late, no matter how tired he would be there, just like that night on the classroom floor.